At the charity gala Billionaire, Travis Holt smiles for cameras until a black woman offers her hand and he dismisses it coldly. The flashbulbs hadn't even dimmed when it happened. The room shimmered with gold and amber tones, the Harvest of Hope banner arching across the ballroom's high ceiling like a solemn promise. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter floated like perfume. Travis Holt stood near the podium, buttoned into a navy tuxedo so sharp it looked like it had opinions. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back with precision, every inch of him curated for control. He'd just finished a speech about upward mobility and bridging gaps. And now he was making the rounds, tight-lipped but photogenic, posing beside donors and nodding graciously. Naomi Kim had her phone clutched close, eyes wide with pride. She had brought Camille tonight, not as an act of charity, but of recognition. Camille Reese had funded more community projects in the South Side than most of these guests had funded vacations, and she did it without ever needing applause. Naomi wanted the city to see her. Camille arrived unannounced at the gala's side entrance. No entourage, no chauffeur, just a steady walk up the front steps, burgundy velvet shawl wrapped close against the Chicago cold. The security barely looked up as she passed. She moved like a woman used to being underestimated and quietly relished it. Inside, Camille melted into the scenery, nodding to a violinist she once helped pay tuition for, exchanging a hug with a busboy whose mom she helped get a loan. Her hair was natural, coiled back into a low chignon. Her dress, chocolate satin mid-calf, whispered class without shouting status. She smiled without effort, grace trailing behind her, like perfume. Then Travis saw her. At first he didn't react. She approached during the interlude between speeches and hors d'oeuvres. He turned at the sound of her soft greeting, brows lifting slightly. "Mr. Holt," Camille said, extending her hand. "Camille Reese, it's an honor to meet you in person." There was a full breath where silence seemed to peel the room open. Travis didn't move. His eyes flicked toward her hand, then up to her face. He smiled politely, shallow, practiced. "I don't shake hands with staff," he said, turning slightly to reach for his champagne. The words dropped like a stone into the soft carpeting. Camille's smile did not budge. Her hand lowered slowly, calmly, with no visible tremble. "Of course," she said gently, her voice silk over steel. "I wouldn't want to compromise your standards." A waitress standing nearby, rosa graying hair, pulled into a tight bun, froze mid-pour. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She looked at Naomi, who stood rooted to the floor, mouth slightly agape, her phone still in her hand, and somewhere someone's camera had caught it all. Camille turned away, not in shame, but in elegance. She walked back into the sea of guests, every step a masterclass in composure. Her shawl swayed as she moved, the deep burgundy catching light like slow fire. In the hush that followed, Rosa leaned over and whispered, "He never shakes hands below his rank." Naomi swallowed hard. "That woman built 3 housing co-ops and kept a food pantry running through 2 winters, she murmured. "She's not staff. She's the reason some of these donors even had someone to give to." Rosa just nodded, returning to her tray with tired eyes and a full heart. Across the room, Travis resumed smiling for photos. But the smiles felt tighter now, less natural, as if even he sensed something had shifted. Naomi stood frozen, phone still in hand, unsure if she'd just witnessed the end of her career or the beginning of something else entirely. Around her, murmurs pulsed like a second heartbeat in the room. She didn't know what had hit harder, Travis Holt's words or Camille's refusal to flinch. The video clip she'd caught short, just a few seconds, was already uploading. Her fingers trembled as she hit post, unsure if she was unleashing chaos or clarity. Across the ballroom, Camille didn't rush. She walked with intention, weaving between clusters of guests who parted for her like water around a rock. Her burgundy shawl caught the light, making her appear more regal than rejected. She didn't glance back at Travis, not once. Instead, she approached a quiet corner where the organizers of a neighborhood literacy program were seated sipping cider and looking like they didn't belong. Camille sat down beside them, as if she'd been expected all along. One of the women recognized her. "Ms. Reese," she asked, eyes wide. "I read about your work in the South Side. I didn't know you were attending tonight. Camille smiled, warm but tired. Didn't know myself until an hour ago. The woman blinked. Well, I'm honored. Truly. And she hesitated. I saw what happened. Camille's gaze didn't waver. So did everyone. But that's not the story. What you do here, she nodded at the flyer on their table. That's the story. Let's talk about that. Back near the main stage, Travis's jaw clenched as he scrolled his phone. Naomi's clip had already hit 300 shares and counting. The comments were ruthless. Some mocked him, others expressed outrage, and a few demanded an apology. One even tagged the Chicago Tribune. Travis had built a career on being careful, calculated, in control. But in less than 10 minutes, all that seemed to evaporate into a headline he couldn't write. He glanced at Naomi, who avoided his eyes. Smart girl, he thought. Dangerous. He didn't move, just stood there, glass of scotch untouched in his hand, staring into the gilded abyss of the ballroom. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. And worse, he realized people had stopped listening anyway. Meanwhile, a ripple of applause echoed from the other side of the room, not for a speech or a toast, but for Camille, who was now speaking quietly to the literacy team, her presence commanding in its stillness. People gravitated toward her without fanfare. Some asked for a photo, others just listened. Rosa, the housekeeper who'd been silently clearing dishes nearby, paused to look at Camille with something close to reverence. She didn't say anything, but she nodded. Naomi joined them eventually, shoulders hunched, guilt wrinkling her forehead. Ms. Reese, I'm so sorry. I never should have brought you into this mess. Camille looked at her, kind but firm. You didn't bring me into anything. The mess was already here. You just turned on a light. Naomi's eyes welled, but Camille placed a hand gently on her arm. Next time, she said, let's choose which room we light up. In the distance, someone tried to resume the jazz music, but the notes hung awkward in the air, out of sync with the mood that had shifted beneath the chandeliered ceiling. A moment had cracked open, and something irreversible had spilled out. The video continued to travel. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Some users added captions. This is what quiet dignity looks like. He said that, out loud, a handshake costs nothing but tells everything. And beneath it all, the algorithm did its job, placing Camille Reese's face and Travis Holt's words on millions of screens before midnight. The storm had only just begun. The gala's energy had changed. People no longer lingered near the open bar or posed beneath the custom floral archway that had cost tens of thousands. Conversations became muted, almost wary, like everyone had collectively remembered that eyes were watching, phones were recording, and moments weren't private anymore. Naomi moved like a shadow, now weaving between guests, absorbing fragments of whispered opinions. Did you hear what he said? She's not staff, she's Camille Reese. I thought she was his peer. Wasn't she one of the panelists? No, worse. She walked here. She walked. The last comment stung Naomi unexpectedly. It wasn't just the arrogance, it was the ease with which people assigned worth. A shawl instead of a gown, shoes without heels, and suddenly you were invisible or worse, dispensable. Camille hadn't asked for any of this. Naomi had brought her here because she believed the gala was an opportunity, a bridge. She hadn't expected that bridge to collapse under a single sentence. By the grand fireplace, Travis stood in a tight circle of men in navy suits and polished Oxfords. One of them leaned in, murmuring something with a smirk. Travis gave a low laugh, the kind that was meant to reclaim control, but it didn't quite land. His eyes kept flickering toward the other end of the ballroom, where Camille now had a small crowd around her, not flashy, not loud, but steady, anchored. What now? One of the board members asked him under his breath. You going to let this spiral? I'll handle it, Travis replied, voice cool but clipped. But even he could feel it control, slipping like sand through glass. Near the dessert table, Rosa quietly refilled the cider urn. She had seen men like Travis all her life, suits with soft hands and hard eyes. But she had never seen someone like Camille command a room by walking away from it. Camille's phone buzzed in her purse. She hadn't checked it since the moment ended. Now she glanced at the screen text, missed calls, and then a notification that stopped her breath for just a beat. You're trending #2 nationwide. She tucked the phone away before anyone noticed. Camille hadn't come here to trend. She came here because Naomi had believed this room would see her worth. Turns out the room had done more than that. It had revealed itself. Someone approached an older man, conservative suit, nervous smile. "Ms. Reese, may I offer an apology? On behalf of the Holt Foundation?" Camille looked at him steady and polite. "That's not necessary. I'm sure your board will come up with something well-crafted." The man flushed, unsure if it was a reprimand or a refusal. Camille let him stew for a moment before offering a softer reply. "But if you really want to make this right, fund something real. No ribbon cutting, no names on plaques, just results." He nodded, eyes downcast, before turning away. Then Naomi's phone buzzed again, this time louder, an email from a producer at a major morning show. "Is Ms. Reese available for comment? We'd love to feature her story tomorrow." Naomi showed Camille, whose face betrayed the faintest trace of weariness. "They're not asking for my work," she said. "They're asking for the moment." Naomi replied anyway. "You'll get the story you deserve." She didn't know how yet, but she meant it. A photographer wandered by, angling for a shot. Camille turned her head away, gaze landing on the exit doors, where the wind outside stirred the curtains just enough to remind her it was still November, still cold, still real. Across the ballroom, Travis was finally alone. The men in suits had scattered. He stared down at his phone again, reading the headline that would come to define the night. "Chicago billionaire snubs black woman at charity gala, calls her staff." Then, just as his throat tightened, just as the scotch lost its taste, within minutes the clip hit social media. Camille's name starts trending. Camille returns to her quiet home and finds her face on the morning news. The screen flickered softly in the corner of the kitchen as Camille placed her coat on the hallway hook. The kettle hummed on the stove, and the faint scent of cinnamon from last night's tea still clung to the air. She stood for a moment, hands resting on the back of a worn kitchen chair, watching the news anchor's mouth move without sound. Micah had left the TV on. He always did when he couldn't sleep. On the muted screen, the clip played, again slowed down this time. The frame froze on her outstretched hand, fingers curved in a polite gesture. Travis's body half turned away from her palm flat against his chest, lips moving in the unmistakable words, "I don't shake hands with staff." Camille pressed her lips together. The kettle clicked off. "Morning, Ma." Micah's voice floated in from the stairwell. He shuffled into the kitchen in sweatpants and a hoodie, headphones hanging around his neck, a bowl of cereal already in hand. His eyes were puffy, either from sleep or frustration. Maybe both. "You're famous," he said, nodding toward the TV as he sat. "For something dumb." Camille poured hot water over her tea sachet, letting the cinnamon rise again. "I'm not famous. I'm just visible today." "Same thing these days," Micah muttered, spoon-tapping the edge of his bowl. "He disrespected you, and now they're turning it into a segment between sports and weather." Camille sat across from him, fingers wrapped around her mug. "People see what they're ready to see. Sometimes it takes one small thing to show the truth." Micah gave her a look, skeptical and tender all at once. "You're not mad." She tilted her head, thinking, "No. But I am watchful." He chewed for a moment, then set his spoon down. "You gonna say something?" "I said what I needed to in the moment." Micah scoffed. "You thanked him." Camille smiled faintly. "I thanked him for showing me who he was." The screen cut to a panel discussion, 3 talking heads arguing about class race and the illusion of equality in philanthropy. One of them mispronounced Camille's last name. Micah shook his head. "You should go on TV. Tell them who you really are." "I don't need to prove anything to strangers," she said, sipping her tea. "You know who I am? That's enough." But as the news segment ended, a string of alerts buzzed across her phone screen. Emails, missed calls, interview requests from networks she hadn't watched in years. Her inbox was no longer quiet. It demanded a decision. She silenced the phone and turned it face down. In the front hallway, the doorbell rang. Camille opened the door to find Reggie Miller standing on the porch, holding a glass pie dish wrapped in a tea towel and smiling like the world hadn't just tilted sideways. I figured you'd need this, he said, lifting the dish. You brought me comfort food, she asked. I brought you my sweet potato pie, which is a whole ministry, he said, stepping inside as she moved aside. She led him to the kitchen where the pie was unwrapped, and Micah's eyes lit up. Uncle Reggie, he said, already reaching for a knife. Forks are in the drawer, and I know you know that, Camille said, though her tone was light. Reggie sat with them, settling into the chair like he belonged there, which, truth be told, he always had. He looked across the table at Camille, his voice gentler now. Are you okay? He asked. Camille nodded. I'm just tired. Tired's not the same as quiet. You've been quiet. She looked at him, then really looked, and in his eyes she didn't see pity or worry. She saw weight. He'd carried rooms like that before, rooms that shifted the second a truth walked in. I'm thinking, she said simply. Reggie nodded. Well, if thinking leads to something that rattles that man's cage, let me know. I'll bring popcorn. Camille chuckled, and for a second, the weight in the room lifted. But it hadn't disappeared. It was simply waiting, like her phone still buzzing quietly under her hand. The phone rang again, this time not with alerts, but with a name Camille recognized, Naomi Kim. She hesitated. For a moment, she considered letting it go to voicemail. But something about the young woman's face at the gala, stunned, flushed with guilt, made her reach for it. Ms. Reese, Naomi's voice came through, small, tight with nerves. I hope I'm not interrupting. I needed to say I'm sorry. Camille stepped away from the kitchen into the quiet hallway. Why are you apologizing, Naomi? I shouldn't have brought you into that space. Not without knowing what kind of man he really is. I didn't know, Camille interrupted gently. You don't need to carry his mistake. Naomi fell silent on the other end. Camille leaned against the doorframe, eyes fixed on a faded family photo in the hallway. You brought me there with good intentions. That's what matters. The rest was always going to reveal itself one way or another. I feel like I lit a match. No, Camille said softly. You opened a window, and the wind did the rest. Naomi let out a shaky breath. I want to help. If there's anything I can do, any way I can support what you're doing, please, I'm here. I believe you, Camille said, voice warm. For now, take care of yourself. This storm touches more than just one roof. She hung up gently, then stood still in the quiet house, letting the moment settle. Her reflection stared back at her from the hallway mirror, older, wiser, but not weary, not broken. Later that afternoon, with Micah upstairs in his room and Reggie gone, Camille sat at her desk in the sunlit den. The scent of pie and tea lingered, but her focus had shifted. She opened her laptop and began scrolling through documents, investment portfolios, nonprofit assets, holdings, and capital allocations from her firm, North Star Collective. She wasn't just a philanthropist. She was a steward of millions' quiet influence, stitched into dozens of neighborhood initiatives, housing co-ops and scholarship funds. She clicked open a report labeled Civic Impact Trust Portfolio D. A spreadsheet unfolded. Camille's eyes scanned the lines quickly, years of practice guiding her. Holt Industries. Her hand froze on the trackpad. She clicked again, then twice more, tracing ownership structures, merger chains, and shell LLCs. A name surfaced, Holt International Holdings, folded under a media and real estate investment trust, partially backed by the very fund she oversaw. The numbers were staggering. Silent shares bundled from 5 different grassroots trusts over the past 8 years, now worth billions. She let out a slow breath. Somewhere along the line, good intentions had paved a road back into the pockets of the very people she'd thought she'd moved beyond. And yet, here it was. Her influence buried, silent, invisible, propping up the image of a man who wouldn't shake her hand. Camille didn't cry. She didn't rage. Instead, she pulled out a notepad and scribbled one sentence. What we fund, we forgive. She underlined it twice. Then she picked up the phone. By late afternoon, the house had settled into its quiet rhythm. A breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves through the half-cracked window in Camille's study, rustling the corner of a manila folder left open beside her laptop. She sat hunched over, spectacles low on her nose, her fingers gently scrolling through dense PDFs, spreadsheets, and archived email chains. Cinnamon tea sat untouched, its warmth fading beside the glow of her desk lamp. Micah had gone upstairs to work on a school project, though he'd paused halfway up to remind her, "Just say the word, and I'll draft your statement. People are waiting." She'd smiled, kissed his forehead, and promised to think about it. She hadn't yet. Instead, she dove deeper into research not about herself or the clip, but about him. Travis Holt. On paper, his conglomerate was pristine, diversified, philanthropic, lauded in Forbes for creating access. Yet Camille knew better than to take press releases at face value. She clicked open a secured folder marked Legacy Investments Dormant. Most of the community capital her firm invested went into tangible work, housing projects, literacy centers, job retraining. But buried in the digital undergrowth were legacy deals they had quietly inherited, forgotten amid growth. One name stopped her breath. Holt Global Holdings. Her eyes narrowed. Clicking through, she traced the investment lineage. Decades ago, before her tenure, her firm had acquired silent shares in Holt's real estate fund, a fund that had since expanded into logistics, tech, even defense contracts. The initial buy-in was modest $12 million. The current valuation, she blinked, $4.2 billion. She stood up so fast, her chair screeched backward. Her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and a long-forgotten sense of urgency. A dormant, overlooked holding now wielded enormous weight in a company that had just publicly insulted her on camera in front of the world. She sat back down slower this time, pressing her palms to her knees to steady herself. Her eyes scanned the documents again, line by line, making sure it wasn't an accounting error. It wasn't. She leaned back and stared at the framed photo of her late husband on the mantel across the room. "You always said we should plant seeds for storms we'd never see coming," she whispered. Her phone buzzed, another reporter, no doubt. She ignored it. Instead, she opened her contact's thumb, hovering over a name she hadn't dialed in years. Amara Eldridge, managing director of the Ethical Equity Coalition. Camille had once mentored her. Now Amara sat at the head of a 50-person board whose votes shifted markets. The call rang twice before Amara picked up. "Camille," she said, voice equal parts curiosity and alarm. "Are you okay?" "I'm well," Camille replied, calm and deliberate. "But I need your help. I've uncovered something significant." Amara straightened audibly. "Go on." "We still have control over 17.8% of Holt Global Holdings through our legacy fund." Amara went silent. "You're saying you can move the needle?" "I'm saying," Camille exhaled, "it's time we rethink where we place our trust and our money." The line stayed quiet for a beat longer. Then Amara responded, "I'll assemble the board. Tonight." Camille ended the call and stared at her reflection in the darkened window. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Somewhere down the block, children laughed in a pile of raked leaves. But inside her home, something had shifted, a private decision made not in anger, but in clarity. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. Behind polished office glass, Travis watches the clip again, this time with concern. The video plays on a muted loop on his sleek office monitor. Camille's extended hand, his slight recoil. The look on her face, not anger, not shock, but a composed sadness that somehow pierced deeper. The room falls still behind him. The sun glints off the glassy skyline of downtown Chicago, but inside Holt Enterprises' executive suite, it feels 10 degrees colder. Travis doesn't turn as his assistant knocks and enters. "The board is ready," she says gently. "I'll be 5 minutes." He keeps watching. Each time the clip restarts, he notices something new. A glance exchanged between guests. Naomi's frozen expression in the background. The camera wobble as someone lowers their phone, stunned. It isn't just what he said, it's what everyone saw. For the first time in a long while, Travis Holt didn't feel in control of the room. He straightens his tie stands and walks to the boardroom with mechanical precision. Inside, 12 people sit around a table made of reclaimed oak and frosted steel. The walls are lined with abstract art meant to project innovation, but today the energy is pure crisis containment. The general counsel clears his throat. The footage has passed 4 million views since breakfast. We've issued a hold on interviews and turned down 5 major outlets so far. And the markets? Travis asks, his voice tight. Flat for now. But our community relations contracts are at risk. The mayor's office paused Friday's meeting. Another board member speaks. We need a statement, an apology, something that feels human. Travis's jaw ticks. It was a misunderstanding. Naomi, seated near the far end of the table, looks up, her hands clasped in her lap. You didn't forget her name, she says softly. You looked at her hand and decided she wasn't worth touching. The silence that follows is sharp. A few eyes widen, a few shoulders tense, but no one interrupts her. I brought her to that gala because she represents everything we claim to support. Naomi continues, her voice shaking but steady. And you treated her like help. Travis stares at her, trying to read the sudden edge in her eyes. Naomi had always been reliable, smart, loyal, composed. But now there's something else, something defiant. I didn't mean to offend her, he replies coolly. That's the problem, she says. You don't see people, you see positions. Travis leans back as if the words physically press against him. We'll prepare a formal letter, legal cuts in sensing the shift. Time with a charitable announcement. It'll soften the press cycle. Travis nods once, then again, slower. But his thoughts are drifting. For the first time in years, he feels the shape of something slipping beyond his grasp. Outside the glass, Chicago keeps pulsing forward. But inside Holt Enterprises, a crack has formed, and it's growing. Camille didn't rush. She never did. Especially not when the stakes were this high, and the silence in her steps held more power than the noise of headlines. Inside a modest conference room, 2 floors above a community credit union, the carpet smelled faintly of lemon polish and old wood. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, catching on the wisps of steam rising from the coffee pot in the corner. Around the table sat 6 people, all quiet, all watching her, not with awe or deference, but with a sort of dawning realization. Some of you didn't know, Camille began, laying her leather portfolio gently on the table. And that's all right. The point was never the spotlight. One woman cleared her throat. You mean, we've been part of Holt Enterprises? Camille nodded, her voice calm. Through layers of mutual funds, joint ventures, and silent partnerships. We hold just over 11% through various trusts and community investment boards. There was a pause, thick with both disbelief and embarrassment. A man in a corduroy jacket leaned forward, whispering as if it might be treason to say aloud. And you've known this? How long? Years, Camille answered simply. Long enough to realize influence only matters if we use it deliberately. The man leaned back, nodding slowly. No arguments, no grandstanding, just the weight of shared responsibility finally landing. Down the hall, Naomi stood quietly near the doorway, having asked to observe but not speak. She had arrived early, hair tied back, eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. What she saw now was Camille, as she had never quite seen her before, not just gracious and composed, but deeply strategic. Every movement was intentional, every word chosen like an offering. Reggie stepped in a few moments later, holding a folder thick with signatures from local organizations and churches, people whose pension funds and community bonds were quietly tied to the same network. He didn't interrupt Camille's pacing explanation, just placed the folder at her side, like a quiet benediction. Then he took a seat, nodding once to her, as if to say, "It's time." Camille turned back to the group. "We are not making a scene. No press release, no hashtags. We're just moving our money, carefully, quietly, where it does more than decorate a balance sheet." There was murmuring, agreement, a few hesitant expressions, but no true resistance. And so it began. Not with fury, not with press conferences or picket lines, but with measured decisions executed in silence. A ripple where others expected a storm. Naomi lingered as the meeting dissolved. She watched Camille gather her notes and slip them back into her portfolio. I wanted to say Naomi started unsure if she had the right. What happened? With Travis? I didn't expect him to be that man. Camille glanced at her, softening. Neither did I. But I've known too many men who mistake access for value. I should have said something, You just did, Camille said gently. And with that, Naomi exhaled for the first time all day. Outside, Reggie waited at the curb beside his old Volvo. As Camille approached, he opened the passenger door for her without a word. She slid in, tugging her shawl tighter against the autumn chill. As the car pulled away, neither of them looked back. It started with a whisper. By Tuesday morning, 3 regional banks reported significant divestments from low-yield portfolios quietly tied to Holt subsidiaries. By Wednesday, a Midwestern energy cooperative moved $30 million from a logistics firm whose name most people couldn't pronounce, let alone trace back to Holt's holdings. None of these moves made headlines. Not yet. But inside the network of investors and analysts who made their livings reading patterns, the tremors were unmistakable. Camille sat in her study tea, cooling beside a closed laptop. She hadn't made a single public comment. She hadn't posted a word. But each transfer form had her fingerprints on it. Not literally, no signature needed in this age of digital consensus. But everyone who mattered knew who had quietly begun to pull the strings. Micah passed behind her, munching on a piece of toast, slowing just long enough to glance at the screen before he asked, "You think he's noticed yet?" Camille gave a small shrug. If he hasn't, someone will tell him soon enough. Across town, they already had. Inside Holt Enterprises, the 12th floor buzzed with tension. Analysts huddled around screens, graphs dipping subtly but steadily. Names like Veritas Transport and Blue Ridge Acquisition were lighting up internal dashboards with orange flags, not because of massive loss, but because key stakeholders were quietly leaving. In the executive wing, Travis Holt stood rigid at his window, staring down at the streets below without really seeing them. Behind him, legal counsel Daniel Rames entered without knocking. "We need to talk," Daniel said, already flipping open a leather portfolio. Travis didn't turn around. "If this is about the press, I'm not issuing another statement." "It's not about the press." Daniel's voice was sharper now. "It's about liquidity." That got Travis's attention. He turned jaw tight. Daniel slid a single page across the glass table between them. Camille Reese's community fund. Her coalition holds controlling shares in 3 Holt-aligned REITs, 2 logistics vendors, 1 third-tier manufacturer, and a 15% stake combined through proxy accounts in Hudson Core Tech. Travis narrowed his eyes, disbelief flickering. "That's impossible." "It's not. We verified everything." Daniel paused, then added, "And she's moving it. Quietly. Precisely." Travis picked up the sheet. The number at the bottom was circled in red, 4.1 billion. He didn't speak for a moment, just stared. Daniel checked his watch. "If this continues for another 48 hours, we won't be able to hide it from the market." Travis dropped the paper onto the table, fingers twitching. "What do you want to do?" Daniel asked. Travis looked toward the muted television screen across the room, still looping the video of the gala. That one moment frozen in high resolution, her hand, his refusal. Now she was returning the favor. Without words, without press, with power. Travis walks into the conference room only to find Camille sitting at the head of the table. He froze. It wasn't the kind of pause that others might notice just a fraction of a second. But Naomi, already seated along the side, caught the flicker in his eyes before his expression fell back into something composed. Almost. The boardroom on the 36th floor had been designed to impress a 20-foot stretch of custom glass-polished oak panels, a sculptural chandelier made to resemble frozen waves. It overlooked Lake Michigan, now wrapped in icy silence beneath a silver December sky. But that morning, the coldest thing in the room wasn't outside. Camille sat where his father once did, where he always did. Head of the table, back straight, hands folded atop a slim leather folder. The navy blue suit she wore cut sharp against the pale winter light. Silver earrings glinted at her ears, catching just enough glow to remind everyone they were there. Her coffee sat untouched before her. She did not rise when Travis entered. He adjusted his cufflink as if that might shift the power dynamic. "Ms. Reese," he said carefully. Mr. Holt," she returned, her voice smooth, free of edge. It wasn't unfriendly. It was simply complete. Self-contained. He took his seat 2 chairs down from her, declining the one beside her, as if proximity might burn. Naomi opened a notebook, her pen poised, but not yet moving. 3 board members filtered in. 2 offered nods to Camille, though it was clear they hadn't expected her presence. The third, a wiry man with a hedge fund past, flipped open his tablet and kept his eyes down. "Let's begin," Camille said before Travis could. It was subtle. Not a takeover, not a rebellion. Just a line drawn with quiet authority, like someone reclaiming a room that had always partially been theirs. Naomi started the meeting minutes. Camille unfolded a document and slid it forward. "Before we address today's agenda, I'd like to clarify voting rights. As of this quarter, the coalition I represent holds 54.3% across Holt-linked entities through combined silent shares and joint investments. That includes discretionary proxy votes secured last month." One of the board members looked up startled. The wiry man blinked twice. Travis sat stiffly, saying nothing. Camille turned a page. "For transparency, I've included the portfolio audit. Page 2 outlines the reallocation from Veritas Transport and Hudson Core, and page 4 shows our holding adjustments post-divestment." Travis let out a short breath. "This is sudden." "No," she said gently. "It's not. You just never noticed." He looked at her, then really looked, and for the first time something faltered behind his eyes. Camille didn't press. She let the silence fill the space, let him sit with the weight of what she had just said. Her tone didn't rise. Her shoulders didn't square as if preparing for battle. She simply existed fully in that chair. Naomi finally spoke. "These documents match what legal flagged earlier this week. Ms. Reese's group has held tiered control across 5 key partners for over 18 months. Most of us just didn't see the full scope." Travis glanced her way, surprise flickering again. He hadn't expected Naomi to speak up, but she continued. "And 2 years ago, during the post-pandemic restructuring, Camille's fund kept Bridgegrove Logistics from closing. No press release, just a capital injection and local staffing guarantees." Camille inclined her head, not as a thank you, but as acknowledgement. Facts didn't need applause. Travis shifted in his chair. "I think what we need to ask," Camille spoke over him, not loudly but decisively. "What you need to ask is how a room named for legacy partners forgot the people who funded its foundation." There it was. The memory behind her words lingered for only a moment, but it landed like a stone in a still lake. Ripples unseen but deep. No one responded. Not yet. Naomi's pen hovered in the air before returning softly to the page. The pause in the room deepened. One of the board members, the older man with salt and pepper hair and a silk tie too bright for the moment, cleared his throat. "I wasn't aware of this legacy. Ms. Reese, you've clearly been involved longer than any of us knew." Camille's eyes didn't flinch. She let him sit in the discomfort of his own admission, then spoke with the calm of someone who had rehearsed these facts 100 times, though never aloud. 8 years ago, she began, I sent a proposal through the Holt Foundation's community outreach arm. It was modest a request to co-fund transitional housing for foster youth aging out of the system. I didn't ask for naming rights, just operational funding and shared oversight. Naomi shifted in her seat, already bracing. Camille continued. The reply came 2 weeks later. I was told in no uncertain terms that my organization lacked sufficient infrastructure to merit risk exposure, that I didn't meet Holt's profile of a strategic partner. She paused not for effect, but because the next sentence carried weight. That same year, a hedge fund you later sued for fraud received a $2.5 million endowment from the same division. The silence cracked just a little. Travis's jaw tensed. That was before my oversight. Camille looked at him, measured. It was under your name. Naomi finally spoke, her voice steady and clear. If I may add, Ms. Reese's community initiatives stabilized 2 of Holt's supply chain partners when they were close to collapse during COVID. One was Wheeler Freight in Detroit. The other, Langston Maritime, had 300 jobs on the line. She glanced across the table. No press, no credit, just payroll that didn't bounce. Travis leaned forward, his elbows nearly grazing the polished table. Why now, he asked, the words half challenge, half confusion. Why come back into this room after all these years? Camille didn't hesitate, because the same hands that were once too unqualified to shake now hold your future steady, she said quietly. And because principles don't expire, they mature. She opened her folder again and laid a fresh sheet atop the documents. A single sentence printed across the top, in bold serif font, proposed audit framework values alignment initiative. Naomi leaned in slightly, her brow rising. The salt and pepper board member adjusted his glasses. Travis looked down, scanned the heading, and blinked. I'm not here for revenge, Mr. Holt, Camille said. I'm here for accountability and dignity. She placed the second document beside the first. This one listed 12 organizations. Schools' food programs housing nonprofits, most with small dollar signs beside their names. The column at the end was labeled Impact Score Holt Criteria NA. These are the people Holt Enterprises labeled as unfit for partnership. And yet they're the reason your supply chains still operate, your tax incentives still hold your goodwill, statements still land. Travis's voice dropped tight with control. So what exactly are you proposing? Camille looked at him, not as an adversary, but as someone staring into a system too long left unexamined. A full audit of Holt's philanthropic and vendor history, she said. Not to punish, to clarify. Who gets resources, who gets ignored. What values decide that? She folded her hands again. It's time we stop rewarding polished images and start investing in proven impact. A stillness fell again, but this one had edges. Naomi was the first to speak into it. I'll draft the initial framework, she said, surprising even herself. We can set review parameters by department and budget year. Camille nodded once. Travis didn't move. His silence was no longer about control. It was uncertainty, maybe even reckoning. And still, Camille didn't rise. She let her presence settle like a stone in the foundation. Something unmoved, long buried, and finally undeniable. The room had grown still again, heavy with something unspoken, yet undeniable. Camille turned another page in her folder, her fingers graceful, deliberate. No rush, no flinch, just purpose. Years ago, she set her eyes fixed not on Travis, but the glass wall beyond him. I submitted a proposal to fund the expansion of Holt's apprenticeship network targeting underrepresented districts. She paused. I received no response. Months later, I was told in writing that our team lacked the credibility to manage legacy-aligned partnerships. One of the board members, Andrea, a woman with sharp eyes and a tighter jaw, shifted slightly. She clearly hadn't known that part. Camille turned her eyes back to Travis. We weren't seen. Not as equals. Not even as serious. Travis opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing useful to say. Not in this room. Not anymore. Naomi finally broke the silence, voice firm, though she barely looked up from her notes. I reviewed the rejection memo last night. It was signed off by former VP Marshall. The phrasing was stark. Camille simply nodded. I'm not interested in apologies. Naomi glanced sideways at Travis. She's not asking for one. Camille stood then slowly. Her frame seemed taller than her modest height allowed, as if history itself had risen with her. I didn't come here for optics, she said, or to be thanked, or to undo what happened at that gala. She placed her palms gently on the table, eyes steady on Travis. I'm not here to shake hands, she said, her voice low calm. I'm here to ensure people like me don't need to. Silence. The kind of silence that sticks to the walls long after the words have passed. No rebuttal, no polished retort. Even the boardroom's built-in HVAC seemed to quiet down, as if machinery itself knew better than to interrupt. Naomi looked down, blinked slowly. One board member cleared his throat but thought better of speaking. Travis sat unmoving. Then from somewhere outside the faint buzz of a phone vibrated. Then another. Naomi's phone lit up with a stream of push notifications. So did the tablet before Travis. Camille hadn't touched hers. Andrea opened a private message on her screen and blinked. It's out, she murmured, eyes widening. The transcript? It leaked. Naomi tapped rapidly. Newswave just posted it, including the quote. The quote. I'm not here to shake hands. Camille remained still. Naomi's voice dropped. It's already trending. Travis looked down at his screen, and for the first time since Camille had entered the room, Something unreadable crossed his face. Not shame, not fear, something quieter. He looked like a man realizing he'd missed a door that had always been open, just not to him. Camille reached for her folder, closed it neatly, and tucked it beneath her arm. "I'll let you all process," she said gently, then turned and walked out, leaving behind a table full of people who finally belatedly understood the power of presence. Micah watches his mother through a glass pane. He never realized how much power she's always held. She stood in the soft glow of the kitchen, her back straight, hands in motion as she rolled out dough on the old wooden counter. The radio played low an old Sam Cooke tune, while the kettle let out a gentle hiss. Outside, snow blanketed the small front yard, burying footprints almost as quickly as they appeared. The air was still, and so was Micah, as he looked through the glass windowpane, seeing his mother as if for the first time. Camille didn't know she was being watched, or maybe she did, and chose not to let on. Her fingers moved with care, flattening, folding, pressing. Cinnamon and nutmeg scented the room. A pie crust rested to her left, half filled. On the other side of the kitchen island sat her old planner, a worn leather-bound journal filled with investment notes, contact names, and strategies, written in her looping, confident script. Micah finally stepped inside. The warmth of the room hit him like a memory apple, slices soaking in brown sugar. The quiet shuffle of socks on tile, and the low hum of his mother's voice late at night murmuring, "I'm just moving pieces." That line, he hadn't thought of it in years. "Need help with anything?" he asked, leaning against the fridge. Camille looked up and smiled, her eyes soft behind her reading glasses. "You could stir the filling," she said. As he moved to help, he glanced again at the planner. "You used to say that when I was little, about moving pieces? I thought you meant chess." "I did," she replied, brushing flour from her palms. "But I also meant life." He stirred the mixture, pausing. "Did you always know you'd end up doing this, running money, making calls that move markets?" She took a deep breath, then walked to the sink, rinsing her hands. "I didn't know how far it would go. I just knew that after your father died, I couldn't afford to let someone else control where our future went. I had to understand the game." Micah listened quietly. He was 17, tall and curious, trying to match the stories he'd heard about his father with the strength he saw now in his mother. He thought about how she moved through the world, not loudly, but with absolute intention. She'd never been one to raise her voice. Yet she'd made the whole financial structure shake with a single withdrawn investment. Before he could ask more, the doorbell rang. Camille wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door to find Naomi Kim standing on the porch, bundled in a thick coat, her breath visible in the cold. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Naomi said, her voice tentative. Camille stepped aside. "You're right on time. We were just baking." Micah gave a nod and quietly stepped out, sensing this was a conversation meant for the two women. Naomi took off her coat, slowly looking around the cozy house. "I've never been inside your home before. It's warm." Camille smiled. That was always the goal. Naomi stood in silence for a moment, then exhaled. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for not doing more that night, for letting you be dismissed, then standing there while it happened." "You didn't let anything happen," Camille replied, her tone gentle. "But I do appreciate the apology." Naomi looked down. "I kept thinking if I had stepped in sooner, if I had said something louder, maybe it wouldn't have gotten that far." "It needed to," Camille said softly. "Not for me, but for others who come after." Naomi's voice trembled slightly. "You've done more than anyone else in that room ever could." Camille motioned toward the couch. "Come sit. There's something I'd like you to consider." Naomi followed, perching carefully on the edge. Camille handed her a folder, simple, cream-colored, without branding. "I'm building something new," she explained. "An initiative that puts community ethics before profit margins. It won't be flashy. It won't make headlines. But it will move things that matter." Naomi opened the folder and scanned the contents. Preliminary outlines, mission statements, names of grassroots organizations. "You want me to join? I want you to help build it." Naomi looked up, her eyes wide. "Are you sure? After everything?" Camille nodded. "You saw the cracks before they spread. That matters to me." Naomi didn't speak right away. Instead, she leaned back slightly, letting the weight of trust settle in. Then slowly she smiled. "Okay, I'm in. Just then, Camille's phone buzzed on the side table. She picked it up, eyes flicking to the screen. It was a name she hadn't expected. Travis Holt. But it wasn't a call. It was a photo of a handwritten letter taken with a phone camera. The image was slightly angled, the edges of the paper curled. But the words were clear. Thank you for not yelling when you had every right to. Camille read it twice, then lowered the phone. She didn't say anything for a while, just sat back, her eyes resting on the fire in the hearth. Naomi noticed her expression. Who was it from? Someone trying, Camille said quietly. That's a start. Outside, snow fell in silence. Inside, two women who'd once stood on opposite ends of a gala now shared a seat on the same couch, planning something that didn't need applause to make a difference. Camille stood and headed back to the kitchen. Come help me with the crust. These pies don't roll themselves. Naomi followed, laughter soft and warm, and for the first time in weeks, the world outside felt a little less cold. By the time they arrived at the community center, the snow had slowed to a lazy drift, soft flakes tumbling under the glow of the streetlights. Camille parked 2 blocks away, as usual, leaving the closer spaces for the older volunteers. She and Naomi walked the rest of the way, bundled in coats, their arms loaded with cinnamon rolls, garlands, and 1 tin of peppermint cocoa that Micah insisted on packing. Inside, the warmth was instant and familiar. String lights already flickered along the windows, casting soft gold across the scuffed gymnasium floors. Kids darted between folding tables with cardboard ornaments and glue guns. A gentle chaos buzzed through the room, half holiday spirit, half sugar rush. Micah had arrived early and was now helping a little boy glue popsicle sticks into the shape of a snowflake. When he saw Camille enter, he gave a quick smile and wave, then turned back to his task, more invested in making sure the snowflakes stuck than in ceremony. That was something Camille had always loved about her son, his ability to show care without needing recognition. Naomi paused near the doorway, taking it all in. I didn't expect it to be this full. It always fills up, Camille said, setting down the baked goods. People come for the decorations, but they stay for the warmth. She nodded toward the back of the room. A few elders from the neighborhood were stringing up ornaments. Quiet hands, steady smiles. Camille moved among them like a thread through fabric, checking on supplies, asking after family members, noting what was missing without writing anything down. Naomi wandered over to the stage and saw a pair of kids trying to hang garland far above their heads. She didn't hesitate, just climbed up on a chair and began looping the ribbon through the curtain rods. An older woman nearby chuckled. Careful up there, sugar. We're not insured for acrobatics. Naomi grinned. If I fall, someone just catch me in tinsel. Camille watched her from across the room. There was something beautiful in seeing Naomi laugh. Not the clipped, nervous laugh she'd once carried in conference rooms, but something full and easy. A kind of returning. Later, Micah wandered over to where Camille was sorting donations by size. Tiny coats with missing buttons, gently worn boots, scarves still carrying the scent of cedar. Mrs. Alvarez brought the pie you like, he said casually, then added, I told her you'd probably go for the corner slice again. Camille gave a soft laugh. She knows me too well. He sat beside her on the bench. You built this, didn't you? I helped, she answered, reaching for a worn pair of mittens. No, Mom. I mean, all of it. This space, these people. They trust you. Camille didn't answer immediately. She looked around the room instead at the way people moved without instruction. How laughter rose and settled like music. How the smallest ones found safety in corners draped with twinkling lights. I never needed to be the loudest voice, she said finally. I just needed to keep showing up. Micah leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. That's power. Camille looked at her son, his eyes reflecting something deeper than admiration, recognition. The kind of understanding that can't be taught in words, only witnessed over time. Suddenly, one of the coordinators called out, Camille, we need extra folding chairs from the storage room. I'll grab them, Naomi volunteered, already moving. Camille started to follow, but Micah touched her arm lightly. Let her help, he said. You've done enough lifting. She smiled and sat back down, letting herself be still, letting others carry for once. From across the room, a young girl tugged at Naomi's sleeve and offered her a red plastic ornament. Naomi knelt down and helped the girl tie it onto a string, the two of them working in silent cooperation. It was a moment Camille didn't expect to feel so deeply, this quiet transfer of grace. Once Naomi had been part of a system that looked right through her. Now she was part of something built by Camille's values. Not as penance, but as participation. And that was what mattered. As evening folded into night, the center began to clear out. Parents zipped coats and gathered sleepy children. The smell of cider and cinnamon lingered in the air. Camille stood near the windows, her hands in the pockets of her wool coat, watching the last of the snow swirl like whispers under the lamplight. Just then, one of the volunteers tapped her shoulder. "Camille, we finished early. Go see what the kids did to the back hall." She raised a brow. "Should I be nervous?" The woman only smiled and nodded toward the double doors. Camille made her way down the side hallway, past the room where they stored art supplies and old trophies. The light at the end was dimmer, warmer somehow. As she approached, she heard soft laughter and the shuffle of feet. And then she saw it. The door to the old quiet room, a space once used for storage, sometimes for meetings, now bore a new plaque. Burnished bronze, simple serif, fawn-mounted, clean and proud. The Camille Reese Fellowship Hall. For a moment, Camille just stood there. Micah came up behind her. "They didn't want to tell you. Thought it should be a surprise." She turned toward him slowly, her voice low. "This was your idea." He shrugged. "Part mine, part everyone's." She looked at the plaque again, her throat tightening. "I used to come in here when no one else did," she murmured. "It was the only place I could think." Micah reached for her hand. "Now it's the place others will think because of you." And though she didn't say anything more, the weight of that gesture of having her name finally on a door sank into her like warmth. Camille stepped inside, slowly, the door clicking gently shut behind her. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, the kind of scent that held memory in its walls. String lights had been draped along the corners, soft and golden, not showy, just enough to warm the shadows. A few folding chairs had been replaced with cushioned benches, and in the far corner sat a table draped in ivory linen, holding a pot of rosemary and a small stack of journals. She crossed the room as if it might dissolve beneath her feet, her fingers brushing the backs of chairs, pausing once at the wall where she used to lean after long board meetings, before she had a vote, before anyone thought she should. Back then, she'd sit here in the quiet with a thermos of tea, letting the hum of fluorescent lights settle her. It had been her retreat when everything felt too loud, the finances, the fundraising, the people who smiled with clenched teeth. No one ever claimed the room, not because it was sacred, but because no one saw the value in silence. But Camille did. Silence was where she recalibrated. Now it was full, not crowded, but full in the way that meant something had shifted. A bulletin board now lined one wall, pinned with photos of volunteers and handwritten thank you notes from kids. In the corner by the rosemary pot sat a framed photograph she hadn't seen in years. Her and her late husband, David, at the groundbreaking ceremony for the first community center they funded. Her arms around him, both of them beaming, unaware of how quickly the years would race ahead. Micah entered quietly, giving her space. He didn't speak, just leaned against the doorway and watched as his mother moved through the room. Her steps slow, her face unreadable at first. She stood in front of the photo for a long moment, her hand hovering near it. And then, with the faintest breath, she traced the edge of the frame. "I didn't think I needed this," she said. Micah tilted his head. "But you do," she nodded slowly. "Not for the recognition, for the reminder." "Of what?" Camille turned toward him, her voice as even and gentle as the snow outside. "That even when the world tries to erase you, the work leaves a trace." Micah smiled faintly. "That's pretty poetic." She chuckled. "Well, I am wearing my good earrings. That always brings out the philosopher in me." He stepped closer, noticing the way her eyes shone, not with tears, but with something deeper. Fulfillment, maybe even peace. "I used to watch you in here, he said, when I was supposed to be sleeping. You'd be writing, always writing, sometimes muttering under your breath about numbers and people who should have known better." Camille laughed softly. "I was just moving pieces. Like chess." She shook her head. "No, like dominoes. Quiet, careful. But eventually everything shifts. Micah moved beside her and slipped his hand into hers. His fingers were broader now, more like David's than hers. He squeezed once. "You built something real," he said. "Not just this room, people. Belief." Camille looked around again, the quiet no longer empty, but alive with presence. A space that had once hidden her had become a testament to her. Not because she shouted, not because she demanded, but because she endured. With grace. At that moment, Naomi poked her head through the doorway. "Camille, you might want to see the front window." They followed her down the hallway, past the last few volunteers wrapping up. Naomi pointed to the bulletin board beside the entryway, where a tablet had been mounted. The headline on the screen read, "The Handshake That Wasn't," and "The Woman Who Redefined Power." Below it, a quote in bold was framed by Camille's photo at the shareholder meeting. "I'm not here to shake hands. I'm here to ensure people like me don't need to." Micah blinked, stunned. "They leaked it?" Naomi nodded slowly. "The transcript. It's everywhere now. Twitter, Reddit, morning shows. You're already a meme." Camille sighed, not frustrated, not surprised. Just accepting. "Well," she said, "I suppose if something had to go viral, I'm glad it was that." Naomi glanced at her with a look of something between awe and affection. That line, "It's what a lot of us wish we could have said." Camille stepped back, taking it in. Her name, her words, her story no longer buried in rooms she was never meant to enter, no longer passed over in the back pages of corporate memos. It was all visible now. They returned inside, just as the snow picked up again, coating the windows in a gentle blur. Camille reached for her coat, but paused before putting it on. Her eyes drifted once more toward the plaque. Down the hall. For all the time she had let others speak over her doubt, her minimize her, this moment felt like a still exhale after years of holding her breath. Micah was beside her again, wrapping his scarf. He looked up at her with a grin. "Dad would have loved this," he said. Camille looked down at him, her voice soft. "He would have smiled at this," she whispered, and with that she pulled her coat tight, turned off the lights in the hallway, and stepped into the night. Her legacy no longer quiet, but shining in every corner she once lit alone. On Christmas Eve, Evanston woke under a hush of fresh snow. The streets shimmered in a soft silver glow, storefronts dressed in pine garlands and red ribbons. Church bells rang gently through the air, mingling with laughter from bundled-up children racing past on sleds. Inside Camille Reese's home, cinnamon-scented steam curled from a mug resting on the windowsill, untouched. She stood still, her gaze on the neighborhood that had shaped and been shaped by quiet years of her labor. On the dining table lay the morning paper folded to the front page. A photograph in gentle sepia tones, Camille outside the community center, holding the hand of a girl, no older than 10, both smiling at something unseen. The headline read, "The Quiet Power." But the markets weren't smiling. Across the country, screens lit up with a headline. No one expected Reese Fund pulls 4B from Holt Industries redirects to black-led ventures. At Holt Tower, Travis Holt sat alone in his former office, now stripped of its title plaque. He'd already signed the transition papers earlier that week, stepping down quietly without statement. The choice hadn't been forced exactly, but he'd felt the weight, the shift. His grip on legacy was no longer rooted in control. It had become something else. On Camille's kitchen counter, Naomi Kim adjusted her scarf and flipped open a laptop. Her fingers trembled only slightly as she refreshed the dashboard live updates showing the new direction of capital flow. The Reese Kim initiative, launched just 2 hours ago, had already closed its first 3 deals, a Detroit-based tech startup led by 3 black women, a wellness collective run by formerly incarcerated mothers, and a green infrastructure company co-founded by an immigrant daughter and her uncle. Naomi looked up. "They said it couldn't be done without Wall Street behind us." Camille stirred her tea and offered a soft smile. "Wall Street has ears, but we have memory and direction." At that moment, Micah burst through the door, cheeks red from the cold. He carried an envelope in both hands, the kind of thick, ivory-colored mail that carried more weight than words could describe. Camille raised an eyebrow, setting down her mug. "That from Howard." He nodded, speechless. Then he held it out. She didn't open it, he did. His fingers shook, but his eyes widened as he read aloud. We are pleased to offer you admission to Howard University's incoming class. He choked on the next words with full tuition through the Reese Initiative Scholarship Fund. Naomi gasped. Camille blinked once. I had no idea you'd already applied. Micah threw his arms around her, the paper crushed between them. You built all this, and you still had room to build me a future too. Camille chuckled softly, brushing a hand through his hair. I didn't build anything alone. Naomi, watching them, stepped aside and glanced toward the window. Outside, a line of neighborhood children moved toward the community center, arms full of tinsel and wrapped boxes. One boy carried a sign that read, Welcome to the Tech Hub. Come on, Camille said, reaching for her coat. Time to see it for ourselves. Camille sat beside her window with a mug of ginger tea, her fingers tracing the frost patterns dancing along the glass. Outside, children zipped by on skateboards, retrofitted with plastic blades, turning the slick streets into makeshift rinks. Across the street, the new wing of the community center stood tall, modern, but still cradled in warmth. Reading, robotics, resilience. The words etched in bronze near the entrance gleamed in the afternoon sun. Naomi stepped out of her car scarf, whipping in the wind, her arms loaded with gift-wrapped boxes and a tablet under one arm. Camille met her at the porch, lifting one side of the load without a word. Inside, cinnamon and nutmeg swirled through the kitchen, and Micah, freshly home from a volunteer shift, was spreading whipped cream on a tray of sweet potato pies. He looked up and grinned at Naomi, who returned a half smile, still unsure how to place herself in the warm rhythm of this house. I brought drafts, Naomi said, tapping the tablet. The framework for the new investment circle. It's clean-focused, and we've got 10 Black-owned startups lined up for review. Camille nodded, but her gaze lingered on the framed photograph near the fireplace, her and her late husband in front of the old church years ago. We'll vet them after dinner, she said. Legacy deserves focus, not rush. Micah, now leaning over a crossword puzzle at the table, glanced up. You know this whole thing? It's still wild to me. You just moved billions and didn't even flinch. Camille smiled softly. I've had years to learn not to flinch. Naomi paused, her fingers tightening on the tablet. Camille, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why didn't you ever take credit? I mean, years of building, giving, changing lives. And still most people don't know your name. Camille poured another cup of tea. Because the goal was never recognition. It was redirection. Money's like water, Naomi. You can hoard it behind a dam or guide it where roots need it most. Naomi sat quietly, the words wrapping around her like the warm throw on Camille's couch. She thought of her first day at Holt Industries, of how she'd once tried to imitate success by staying silent and blending in. Now in this room, surrounded by laughter and pie and the scent of purpose, she was learning a different kind of strength. As night fell, they walked together to the community center for the caroling hour. The walkway lights blinked in patterns like little stars leading them home. Inside, kids draped garlands on artificial trees, their fingers sticky with candy canes. One child accidentally knocked over a donation box, and the coins scattered across the polished floor. Micah crouched to help, his face gentle as he smiled at the child. Camille watched him quietly. Naomi stood beside her. He's gonna do great things, Naomi said. Camille didn't respond at first. Her gaze was on the bulletin board across the hallway, flyers for tech mentoring, food drives, college prep nights, all bearing a simple emblem now, Reese Initiative. I just gave him a blueprint, Camille said at last. It's up to him to build something better. They reached the old quiet room at the back of the center. When Camille pushed open the door, it was bathed in soft golden light. Along the far wall, a new plaque had been mounted. The Camille Reese Fellowship Hall. Camille took a breath. The room that had once been forgotten, used for overflow supplies and dusty chairs, was now filled with bookshelves, beanbags, and a smartboard glowing with STEM games. A group of young girls huddled near a window, working through a business plan for a bake sale. Micah stepped in behind her. This used to be the room no one came into, he said. I know, Camille whispered. Naomi touched the plaque reverently. You didn't just reclaim a room. You redefined it. Camille turned to her son and said softly, Your father would have smiled at this. Micah nodded, eyes shimmering under the soft twinkle lights. Outside, church bells rang, announcing Christmas Eve Mass. The cold was sharp, but the inside world had never felt warmer. And far away in a penthouse office, stripped of portraits and power, Travis Holt stared at a letter he'd just signed. One final donation anonymous, but bearing a note in the margin. May this seed bloom somewhere better than where it was once sown. Camille didn't know about it yet. She didn't need to. The final carol had ended, and most of the children were gone, scooped up by gloved hands and parents with thermoses of cocoa. The snow had thickened into soft powder, blanketing the sidewalk and muffling footsteps. Camille stood still on the steps of the community center, her hands resting on the railing, watching the last of the skaters twirl clumsily under the street lamp's amber glow. She wore her navy blue coat collar, turned up the same one from winters long past. In the distance, she could hear bells ringing faraway hymns weaving with laughter from inside. Naomi stepped beside her, pulling her scarf tighter. I almost forgot what peace felt like, she said, her breath curling into the night air. Camille didn't answer right away. Her eyes followed a small boy, gliding too fast, nearly falling, only to be steadied by an older girl in a red hoodie. The two burst into quiet giggles and kept skating. Naomi reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded program. On the cover, the Reese Initiative Winter Launch Celebration. Inside, Camille's name was listed as founder and legacy steward. You know what hit me today? Naomi said, voice gentle. It's not the money, not even the impact. It's that you made space for others to matter. You taught me what worth really means. Camille turned toward her, her face lit softly by the overhead bulb. Her smile came slowly, not out of pride, but deep peace. Respect is generational, she said simply. Then, without ceremony, she turned and walked back inside. The doors closed behind her with a muted hush, just as the first real flakes of snow began to fall, soft, steady, as if the sky itself had bowed in acknowledgement. From across the street, a reporter watching through the fogged window lowered her camera. She didn't take the photo. Some moments she knew were meant to live quietly etched not in headlines, but in hearts. She never raised her voice, but the world heard her anyway. In a moment that began with silence, Camille showed that dignity doesn't demand attention, it defines it. Sometimes the most powerful change comes not from shouting, but from standing still in the truth. Kindness when steady becomes a form of leadership no title can bestow. If this story stirred something in you, pass that quiet power on. A gesture you give today might light someone's way tomorrow.